I'm Jennifer Johnson. I'm Director of the Research and Innovation Office at Loughborough University in England, and also past Chair of the Association for Research Managers and Administrators in the UK as well. And it's through that role that I've done a lot of work and different projects on the topic of research security in the UK. I am joined by my panel this afternoon, who I will introduce after the presentation and before we come to the panel session. Could I have the slides, please? That's fine, please come in. Okay. So I was asked to speak to you today about the question, what is research security? First of all, what is that about? And also the context in UK higher education with regards to how we have been responding to the research security agenda. So research security is about protecting your intellectual property, sensitive research, people and infrastructure. And I think those last 2 points, people and infrastructure, are also particularly important because we often think that it's only about intellectual property, and that's not the whole picture. And we're protecting them from theft, manipulation and exploitation, including and particularly as a result of interference by hostile actors. So when I talk about research security or I talk about trusted research, this is what I'm talking about. So in the UK, on the slide here, we have a timeline of what our response in the sector has been to this agenda. I'm going to go through each of these different areas individually on separate slides, but what I wanted to point out on this slide is just the gaps in the timeline. So as you'll see, from 2002 to 2019, not an awful lot happened. Not many universities were thinking about this. It wasn't high on our radar. If you were a particularly technical university working in some particularly niche technological areas, then perhaps you were thinking about export controls. But generally, most people in the sector weren't worrying about research security. You'll see in 2019 that things started to pick up very rapidly indeed. And I always recall a conversation with our main funder in the UK, UKRI, which is UK Research and Innovation. It's the main government funder of research. When they called me in 2016 and said, Jenny, what due diligence are you doing when we fund you with internationally collaborative research projects? And I said, well, we're not doing the due diligence because you do that before you give us the funding, don't you? And then the penny dropped and everything changed. And that was the beginning of this kind of sequence of events. So in terms of what changed, not only that conversation, but over that time period, the volume of international research has, of course, increased. International collaboration is increasing all over the world, but especially in the UK, we've seen a huge increase in the volume of our research outputs that do include international co-authors. Our projects are becoming increasingly complex in addition, so not just lots of international partners, but complex and emerging technologies, complex structures of projects, complex funding arrangements, and also partners coming and going from projects at different times as well. So you may undertake some due diligence on some partners at the beginning of a project and then start work, and then you forget all about it, and other partners come and go throughout the life cycle of the project as well. There's the matter of emerging technologies, so areas such as AI, additive manufacturing, quantum computing. They're advancing globally at a rate faster than what regulation can keep up with them. So we're in a position now where we're having to think about regulation, yes, but we're also having to think about what can we do to protect our research in areas where the regulation has not yet caught up, where there is no law, there's no case law, there's no policy, but we still need to protect our research and our people and our infrastructure. Funder terms and conditions have changed. So after that conversation that I referenced, it became part of UKRI's terms and conditions that whenever they fund a UK university, we are responsible for undertaking due diligence on all of our partners. That made us sit up and take notice. And indeed, the geopolitical environment is ever changing. So what is actually at risk? Why are we concerned about this? So there's the risk of the misuse of research, the dual use agenda in particular. So you may be undertaking research for a civilian purpose, but you don't have to think very hard to think about how it could be used for an alternative purpose, how it could be used for military purposes, for economic gain by other nations. You can think of a dual use for actually almost any piece of research that you can look at. So it's not dual use in itself that's bad. In fact, in many ways, dual use is good, right? You set off researching one thing and then you find that it solves a whole host of problems in another discipline. But it's where that dual use can be used for purposes that don't align with the values of your own state. That's how the UK government puts it. There is the theft of intellectual property that I've mentioned. There are also people issues in this. So there's the potential for coercion of researchers and staff, for people being bribed, blackmailed, for all sorts of forms of persuasion for individuals who are either doing the research or may not even be doing the research. They may be the janitor that has the keys to your lab, being coerced or threatened in order to provide actors with access to your research. I know it sounds like I'm talking about something out of a movie, but it is what happens. And then there's huge reputational risk that can be involved as well if your research is used for purposes that, again, don't align with the values or the intentions of your state. In terms of who you're at risk from, I think we could probably all guess, but in the UK we take what's called an actor-agnostic approach. But I'm not in the UK. But we don't go around in the UK saying we're worried about China, we're worried about Russia, we're worried about Iran. We are, but we say that we are putting in place regulation and policies in order to guard against any potential hostile nation or any potential threat. But really we're thinking about China, Russia and Iran. And this is just a slide on some of that reputational risk that I mentioned. So none of us want our university or indeed our own research to be on the front page of our national or international newspapers saying that this Polish university, this British university worked with Iran on drone research, which is going to be used against us, which is going to be used by the military. And these are just a handful. I could fill a whole slide deck with these examples. So what are we doing about it in the UK? What's our response to this agenda? The UK Security Services, part of government, developed a programme, a communications programme that's called Trusted Research. So if you're working with UK colleagues on this topic, you might hear us talk about trusted research, almost in place of the language of research security. They developed guidance for universities, for individual researchers, also for businesses and spin-out companies on how to protect against these threats. There are checklists, there are toolkits, and most of this is openly available. So you can look on the Trusted Research website and you can access those toolkits and checklists and so on as well. And this is one of the campaigns. So you see they're trying to make it very accessible. They're not trying to make it kind of a frightening security threat kind of campaign, but they're trying to say, stay safe when you're traveling, protect your research. It's just, we're trying to couch it in a language of security and protecting your partnerships and protecting your research, not in a language of you might break the law and the bad guys are coming to steal your IP. I mean, ultimately it's the same thing, but we're finding that the former approach is getting a lot more engagement and buy-in from our academic community. The UK government established something called RCAT, the Research Collaboration Advice Team. It was established in 2001 and it's been very well received by the sector. It's effectively an advice service to universities with regards to research security. So if an academic comes to me and says, I want to undertake this collaboration with this university in this actor-agnostic country, China, and I think, oh, I'm not really sure about that, and I do whatever checks I need to do in-house, but I still think I'm not really sure, I call ARCAT and they can give me advice. They can't make government security briefings directly accessible to universities, but they can kind of mediate and you know, tell us. They can't tell us exactly what it says in those security briefings, but they can say, we would strongly recommend that you do not do this. Or if you do that, you're going to need to apply for an export control license. You might be wasting your time, but you can apply if you want. So that kind of advice. They advise on the most common issues, and they also work with universities on developing their risk appetite and putting in place their processes and procedures for being able to support research security. And you can see on the slide here the most common things that universities ask them about and the most common high-risk collaborations or areas of technology that we're asking about. And you'll recognise on the slide there, advanced materials, AI, advanced robotics, synthetic biology, quantum technology, space technology. These are some of those areas where the technology is advancing ahead of regulation and legislation. So we're often in a grey area. Rather than there being black and white legislation on what we can or can't do. These are some of the resources that you can find on that website. I won't go through them all, but the slides, I believe, will be shared. And these are the regulatory frameworks that we have in the UK that ARCAT can advise us on. So we have an export control framework. This is probably one of the most familiar to people in different countries across Europe. So it's designed to manage the transfer of intellectual property in those dual-use situations that I mentioned earlier. We also have the National Security and Investment Act, which gives government the power to intervene in business transactions to protect national security in 17 defined sensitive areas. And when the government launched this, they said, oh, don't worry, universities, it's not for you. This is for business. Don't get all excited about how it's going to affect your research. They've just published their annual report, and 25% of the cases that they intervened in the last year were in higher education. So we're quite concerned in the UK about a regulation and legislation-led approach, even when we're told that it won't actually apply to higher education and that there'll be exemptions. We're trying to pursue much more of a culture of security, and universities working together to put in place our own safeguards and trying to demonstrate to government that actually we can protect against these threats on our own. We don't need you becoming heavy-handed with the legislation. I'd say we're 50-50 in terms of our success on pushing that argument at the moment. The National Security and Investment Act is a good example of where we didn't do very well at convincing government to let us self-regulate. The Academic Technology Approval Scheme, or ATAS, applies to international students and researchers who are subject to UK immigration control. So this is our methodology for checking individuals that we're concerned about rather than organisations or projects. So if certain students or certain researchers are coming to work at my university, they have to go through this government check, first of all, to ensure that there aren't security concerns. And then the National Security Act, which contains the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, which is a scheme that requires organisations and individuals to register all of their interactions with any particular foreign government or body or individual. I'm very grateful that we just had a change of government in the UK and they've paused that scheme, because you can only begin to imagine how difficult it might be for me as a director of research to get every one of my academics to register on a government system every single interaction that they have ever had with a particular country or a particular company or a particular university elsewhere in the world. It simply wouldn't happen. It's another example of policy making and legislation and regulation perhaps going too far into a space that simply won't work for the higher education sector. But it's not just what government have been doing. The sector have been trying to come up with our own responses as well. So Universities UK, which I think is similar to NAWA in the UK, has published guidance for universities. This was particularly aimed at senior decision makers, vice-chancellors, provosts, pro-vice-chancellors for research, and it was very successful in getting the issue of research security onto the agenda of our most senior leaders. However, we've also been doing things from the bottom up. So we have an organisation called HECA, the Higher Education Export Control Association, which is a gathering of experts, basically, mainly of research managers and lawyers in universities, in professional services. And they provide training, run events, get groups together to share practice. They have a particular focus on export control, though, not on the whole of the security agenda. And this is a project that I was involved in. So myself and a group of colleagues were funded by the UK government to undertake this project, Complex Collaborations, which was looking at how universities are actually responding to this challenge. How are we operationalising the response? It's okay for Universities UK to tell your Vice-Chancellor we need to be worried about research security, and for the Vice-Chancellor to say, yes, yes we do. So who's going to do anything about it? Who checks? Who answers your question when you think, oh, should I collaborate with these or should I not? So in the UK, generally that role falls to research managers. And this project looked at where we're at with that rollout, whether we have the resources, whether we have the expertise, whether we have the capacity. You won't be surprised to learn that what we found was that we're on a journey. So we made a number of recommendations, and we tested these with our sector. We made recommendations about whether having a national body, a kind of national advisory body that was not a government body, would be useful to them, about whether having a clearinghouse where information could be shared would also be useful to them, and about what kind of training would be useful, and how we could potentially develop a talent pipeline. Because the thing is, even if you gave me £200,000 tomorrow to go out and hire a bunch of people to work in my universities to support this agenda, I don't know where I'd find them. Because they're not in other universities, so I can't just recruit them from somewhere else like I would if I wanted a research ethics manager or a technician. The talent doesn't exist. There aren't people out there that know this agenda, and we have to train them from the beginning. So some of the things that we found in the project, we asked how much it was costing universities to respond to this agenda at the moment. The answer was somewhere between £9.5 and £10.8 million per annum in UK universities. And we asked whether people thought that cost was going to go down now that we're getting used to this. It's not a new thing to us. Or was it going to stay the same, or was it going to go up? And I have been asked whether I missed a bit off the graph, because decrease is, there's no part of the chart for decrease. I didn't miss it off the graph, but no one said that they thought that the costs would decrease. There's a recognition that this is only going to get harder and more serious and more complex. The top three concerns for universities were the capacity of professional services to operationalise these requirements. Frequently, someone in the research office is given this as an extra job on top of the job that they've already got, and there's no more time and there's no more resources. The second concern was the lack of a central repository to share information across the sector. And the third concern was, how do you know when you've done enough to satisfy your funders or the government in this agenda? So we do some checks, we do some due diligence, we look at the evidence and we think, okay, we're going to go ahead with a collaboration. Research managers and academics in our universities in the UK were still afraid that maybe they hadn't done enough, and therefore maybe government was going to come calling saying, actually, you haven't satisfied this legislation and you're in trouble. So they were the three main concerns. And this is my final slide. The final thing that we came up with in this particular project was this maturity curve, that we asked universities to think about where they were in terms of their development in the response to this agenda. And we've used this on some other European and international events and things that we have that we've run. And it's really interesting to see where universities and different organisations place themselves on this curve in terms of responding to research security. So at the very beginning, we have number one, learning. where universities often talk about feeling overwhelmed. There's this big problem and we don't really quite know what to do with it. We don't even know if we understand what the problem is. We just know there's something we have to do. Moving on from there into an inconsistent space. So there are some resources, something's happening, but it's very inconsistent. Then into functional or consistent, where there's some dedicated resource, but there is some decision making, but there can still be a single point of failure, perhaps just one person in the organisation that's leading this work. And then you'll see it was a dotted line into 4 and 5, integrated and cultural, because at the time we did this report, we couldn't find anyone who really felt that they were there. But that's what we're aiming for, of course. When a research security mindset is embedded as part of the culture in all that we do in our research, to ensure that we don't then fall foul of these risks with regards to research security. I shall leave it there and join my panel so that someone else can do some of the talking. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask my panel to introduce themselves and to give you some opening remarks with regards to this topic, and then we'll move on to some questions. So if I start to my left with Valerie.
Okay, hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for invitation. I'm very glad to see the full room of people who are interested in this topic. I am from the Czech Republic. I am the very close neighbor of you. From the Charles University. I hope you know this university is the biggest one, oldest one in the Central Europe. And we started with this topic a few years ago. And if I can mention the history, why we started this, we had some problems in the 2019 with Czech-China Institute. I don't think so. You know the problem, yeah? There is something is saying yes. Yes, there was just a quite big problem, and together there was a problem with donations from company, from the private company, and there was the money comes mainly from the China, and the problem. The solution comes from the senates, the student senates, and from the students and from the academic, that it's a problem and we have to solve it, and we have to manage some principles not to be again. For example, if I can be more practical in this session, that there was a contract with this company, if I can mention. It is a home credit, if you know that. No. It's the Czech company, but mainly now it's a Chinese company for loans. And Charles University didn't want to be together with this company. And after the solution, this problem, they found out that the contract comes from one department to another in the rectorate of the Charles University, and no one takes the responsibility for the contract. It is only law if it is right, if the funding is right also, but not the responsibility for the due diligence. Who is this company? Who the money comes, and so on. And after that, with these two big problems, comes the rector with the solution, and when in 21 comes the assignment or the internal law in this subject. So, but it was in COVID, and then everything goes slow, and we are now dealing about 1-2 years, and in our practical, the practice and the theory, because the theory was the first. We have the internal law, how it should be going through the university, all this topic. And the practical is a little bit different. We had also some blind ways how to not to manage it. But now I'm here to spread our practical with you, how it's managed in the biggest university in the Central Europe. For my position is named Counter Foreign Interference Manager, and I'm responsible for the institutional resilience at the Charles University, and I have a lot of ways how to do it. But maybe later?
Yes,
Okay.
I will come back to you about how
you.
to do it. Thank you. I'll come to Anne-Marie.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. My name is Anne-Marie Feynman. I'm from Sweden. I'm a chief analyst with Vinnova, Sweden's innovation agency. We're an agency, funding agency, under the Ministry of Climate and Enterprise. And we, in Sweden, we have, on this particular topic, a national initiative that was started about a year ago, which is a government assignment on something that the term that we use is responsible internationalization. So there are 3 agencies involved in this. It's the Swedish Council for Higher Education. They are in the lead. We have the Swedish Research Council and Vinnova. So it's an inter-agency initiative. We have 2 main tasks. One is to suggest national guidelines for responsible internationalization, which we delivered to the government at the end of March this year. What we're working on now is to suggest a support structure or a support function to help primarily higher education institutions, academic institutions, to work with responsible internationalization. So we're taking rather a cultural rather than a legislative or regulatory approach. And so we are due to deliver our suggestion for a support function in mid-December this year. So we're doing a lot of work on that at the moment. I also coordinate a group of the 6 main public funding bodies in Sweden on how are we supposed to approach this issue of responsible internationalization, because as funding bodies we have a very important role to play, and what we do actually has an influence, it has an impact on the research and innovation ecosystem. Just a few words on the term responsible internationalization. It's slightly broader than research security. It includes research security, but it also includes things like perspectives on human rights and gender equality and some other issues that we might want to take into account in this particular perspective. And one thing that I'd like to put to you, we're talking about risks, and I think the absolute biggest risk is to not do international collaboration. So all of the work that we do is about helping organizations, academic institutions, and also other actors in the innovation, research and innovation ecosystem to do more international collaboration rather than less, in spite of the fact that it is actually becoming a little bit more difficult. So that's really what I'd like to start off with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Fiona.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Fiona Quimber. I'm a senior analyst at RAND Europe. We are a non-for-profit research organization. We conduct research for the government, and in particular, I will talk to you about China today, because I lived and I studied in China, and my job is to study China's research and innovation ecosystem and its implication for European security. I had a quick look with some of my colleagues earlier this week at the landscape and the threat exposure in Poland. So I looked on some bibliometrics database, trying to understand how many Polish universities collaborate with China, and how many papers are co-authored between Polish scientists and Chinese high-risk institution. And the number was much lower than the UK, but nonetheless quite interesting. Over 100 studies conducted in the last 5 years, with research institutions linked to the People's Liberation Army, including a lot of military medical universities in China. So the People's Liberation Army General Hospital or the Second Military Medical University. In addition to those, with what is a group of highest risk institution, there were a number of other collaboration with high risk institution. About 656 studies conducted in the last 5 years between Polish academics and academics in China linked to the Seven Sons universities. You may have heard or not heard about the Seven Sons. They're civilian universities in China, which are linked to the Chinese military or support the Chinese defense industrial and technological base. The topics of those collaboration, of those papers, were in energy generation, material science, soft robotics, solar physics, batteries, cancer treatment, genomics. Applications could be used for powering small autonomous vehicles or developing precision-guided munition or improving the maintenance of military vehicles, also protecting military satellites. So quite a lot of dual-use application, but I think the situation is just not as clear-cut as this, as Jenny was mentioning earlier. And so then I had a look at, well, in those areas, is China doing better at it than Poland? And is there an interest actually for Poland to collaborate with institutions that could be high risk, but may have more knowledge or more advanced knowledge than Polish universities? And I took just the field of batteries, for instance, and I looked at research performance of Polish universities and Chinese universities in the field of battery. And about 6,000 articles from Chinese universities ranked in the most cited articles on those topics, and in contrast, about only 4 articles from Polish universities. So although those are collaboration with high-risk entities, there's also collaboration that could potentially be beneficial on a case-by-case basis if your university is lagging behind some of your partners. So I guess the question I need to ask is, on a case-by-case basis, you probably want to understand who comes on top in those collaboration, meaning who stands to benefit the most from the collaboration, and does the winner take all of it? Or are there spillover benefits for you and for your partners in this? So again, that case-by-case basis is going to be very important, and we have very different approach in the UK, and you'll have a different approach in Poland based on your research performance and where you're standing.
Thank you, Fiona. So I guess what Fiona's touched on a little bit there is the need to balance the risks and benefits of international collaboration and also academic freedom with security. So this isn't a black and white topic. So it wasn't going to be my first question, but since Fiona's touched on it, Anne-Marie, can I come to you on how we can balance academic freedom with the benefits of international collaboration and the security agenda?
Well, the how is the really difficult thing. The important thing is that I think we need to be aware of what we're doing, basically. I think that's the main thing. We need to do our due diligence. And I think the more we know about ourselves, our own context, our own institutional context, as well as our national context, and the more we know our partner, the better it is. And I think, as Fiona was saying, it's a case-by-case basis. You need to balance risks and opportunities and make sure that, how should I put it? The risks are worth the upside of any international collaboration that you do. How you do that, it's a really hard question. There are various due diligence tools you can use. There are various, in some countries at least, various support functions that you can ask for help. But you do need to spend time actually doing it, time and effort. It does take time and effort. I hate to say this because we would like to think that we could do this and it'll be easy. You just do something, you click a box somewhere, you have a look somewhere, and it'll be done. But that's not exactly the case. And I think regarding the academic freedom, it needs to be done by the academic institutions, a lot of it themselves, because they only know, they are the ones who can know the local context, the institutional context, and know what they need and know what the upside of the international collaboration can be. So, yes.
Thank you. And so we said we'd come back on how you're actually doing it. How are you at Charles University balancing these risks?
To balance the academic freedom. Academic freedom is the number one. And if I can spread the strategy in this topic all around the university, I insist that academic freedom is above everything. If you want to collaborate with China University, you can. But you have to be, you need to know who is your partner, what access you are giving to him, and what is the university. You have to do a due diligence. And at the university, this topic is a service. It's a service for academic staff, for normal staff, to deal with this topic, because this topic is growing up nowadays. And they have to manage it in their projects, manage it with their partners from UK, from US, because they insisted on it, and they need to know where they go in the university to help them with this, with the due diligence. And there is no way, if they wanted to cooperate with somebody, for example, from China, we do our best, the most what we can, to cooperate with them. Okay.
Thank you. And just to add a little bit more about how we deal with this in the UK, we have an area where things are very clear-cut, and then we have a grey area. Where things are very clear-cut is where we do have legislation, and we have very specific instructions from our government on things that we can or can't do. So, for example, if we need to apply for an export control licence to work with a particular partner, and that licence is not approved, then we absolutely cannot do that research. There's no academic freedom question. The law comes before academic freedom. But of course, that doesn't cover off every kind of issue of research security or risks in research that might occur, especially, as I was saying earlier, because some technology areas are moving more quickly than what our export control legislation can keep up with. So this is where we come into the more grey area, where it comes down to a matter of your organisation's risk appetite. In the UK, universities are strongly encouraged to decide what their risk appetite is and to document that, so that there is a framework to test these decisions against when they come up. In the vast majority of cases, academic freedom wins out in that more grey space. But there are occasions where the institutions that I've worked at, including Loughborough, where I work at the moment, does say no. There's not a legal reason for you to not work with this partner or undertake this project, but reputationally, the risk is too high for us. It exceeds our risk appetite, and we will not permit this research to go ahead. It's a very difficult conversation to have. As director of a research office, so I consider myself a professional research manager. The whole purpose of my career is to facilitate research, to enable research to happen and to happen well. So when I have to say to someone, no, this research can't go ahead, that's a really difficult thing to do. But I do think it's important that universities understand what their risk appetite is outside of that very clear-cut space where the law makes the decision. Otherwise, we'd just say yes to everything. most of the time what we try to do is say yes, but say here are the mitigations. So we've undertaken our due diligence, we understand the nature of the risks, and these are some of the types of things that we can try to do to mitigate that risk. So for example, if the project involves individuals from a partner coming onto our campus, we can try to lock down the access that they have on campus. Most university campuses are very open spaces, right? You walk in, you've got access to everything. You've got to log into the computer, you can get into the whole network. I come to your university on a collaboration to do with English literature, but once I'm on the computer, I know everything you know about synthetic biology as well. So we have to think about how we can use mitigations to mitigate the risks to enable as much research as possible to still go ahead. Did you want to comment?
Yes, yeah. Just to add to that, I think what you have in the UK, you have national guidelines. We have national guidelines. Well, we're working on national guidelines in Sweden. A number of other countries have national guidelines that can be, and they are guidelines. They are not regulation. They are not legislation. They are guidelines to guide you through the grey areas that Jenny was talking about. And I think that's a very good idea to have them on a national level. I know there's a suggestion also that we should have them on an EU level. Regardless of what level they're on, they will also always need to be adapted to your own situation, to your own institutional or academic context, because there are differences. As you were saying, risk appetite. You need to define what are the relevant guidelines for your university or your funding agency or whatever organization in the ecosystem that you are in, because it will vary. But to have that sort of thing on an overall level could definitely be, is there to support you in that work, I would say, as well as the support structure.
Yeah, thank you. So Fiona, if I can come back to you. So you spend a lot of your time as an analyst understanding some of these risks, I imagine. Could you outline for us what do you think are some of the key risks, and what kind of tools or practices would you use if you wanted to better understand or to mitigate some of those risks?
Thanks, Jenny. That's a great question. So I guess you've mentioned already common key risks that we've seen before. In the UK, you've talked about the risk to your intellectual property, your know-how, your technologies, but I think the one risk I really want to highlight is to people, risk to people. So in your collaboration, China uses talent recruitment programs, for instance, so programs that seek to recruit researchers from other countries to come and stay in China, or to stay in their country, but helps China's strategic interests, either by conducting research on topic of priority to China, or by recruiting other researchers that might help those research efforts. Those talent recruitment programs are not always very transparent and divulged. The contracts, they are specific contracts, and in some cases the contract stipulates that a Polish researcher, a UK researcher, a German researcher is not allowed to disclose that they're taking part in the Chinese talent recruitment program. This is where disclosure is really important, and this is where we're not just talking about conflict of interest, but conflict of commitment. This is really important for your university. Someone in your university may be spending time doing research for another country, for other purposes, on university time, and is not disclosing it to your university. So this is called conflict of commitment. Other risk, I will agree with Anne-Marie, the risk of foregoing or of not collaborating is massive. Over the past few years, we've seen in countries like Australia, in the US, in the UK, collaboration with China plateauing, slowing down, and in some cases starting to decline because of the hesitancy or reluctance of some researchers now to collaborate with China. I tend to, when I speak to people who collaborate with China, I tend to see different groups of researchers. Those who have long-standing collaborations and still wish to continue to collaborate. those people will continue their collaboration. The people who tend to forego or to not continue collaborations are people who are maybe starting new collaborations or a bit hesitant or wanted to collaborate with China. And these tend to be the people that just will not want to bother anymore. And so this is the cost to your university where you may not have new collaborations and the established ones are still ongoing. So those are probably the two main risks at the moment that should be really important to you.
Thank you. And Valerie, coming back to some of the processes and strategies and tactics that you've been putting in place then at Charles University to deal with these risks, what are the main risks that you're seeing and how are you practically responding to them?
The main risks to the people, main risk is also the people in this subject. So our strategy is to spread information all through the university. And Charles University is really big. We have 50,000 students, 10,000 is from foreign, and we have 10,000 academic and staff, but in fact it's 30,000 because in numbers we are counting together if one is 1.5 or 0.2 practice, it's only one. So in fact, it's physically 30,000 academic staff and technical staff. So this is a big problem. And we have 17 faculties from humanity, theology, philosophy. We have also math, physics. We have natural science, humanity science, and so on. And every faculty is different. You have another approach to a faculty of philosophy and to the math and physics faculty. In fact, in practice, the math and physics is the best one because they already know that they are dealing with something special, something what it could be stolen. But the worst faculty is the philosophy one, because they are very open to everything and to everybody, and it's really a problem, as I can say with my practice. There is no weak, there is one more problem with something like this. And we have also institutes. We have 14 institutes. 17 faculties, 14 institutes, and it's a lot of work how to train these people, because you have to work with academics, but mainly with the staff, the assistants, the secretaries, the departure of research, departure of students, and so on, because these people need to know what to do. Where could be the potential problem and where to focus on. So this is the main work for me, to spread the strategy and the knowing about this problem, and to make some guidelines for them. We have guidelines from Ministry of Education, Ministry of Interior, because we have some working group together with Ministry of Education, Ministry of Interior, and Ministry of Industry, and Charles University, and many other universities in Czech Republic are joining together. This is the main steps now, that we are joining together. We are signing, next month we are signing a memorandum about cooperation with another universities in the Czech Republic, because there's not the salvation that Charles University will take this subject, but another one from another city will not. So we have to cooperate. We have to spread our practical. Mainly the practical, I don't know how to say, practicals. Best practices issues. What can happen, because how it is spreading all around the Charles University. It's every month there is a new subject where you can find this subject, this trusted research. So.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah, and so you started to talk there about the importance of sharing with other universities in your country, and you've touched on that a little bit with the national guidelines as well, Anne-Marie. But do you want to say a bit more about why it's important that we collaborate on this topic and at what level?
I think there are a number of things that this is a fairly new topic for a lot of academic institutions, or maybe not new, but it's become a lot more important, and different organizations have different capabilities and different possibilities to work with these questions. So I think, and it actually not only goes for different academic institutions, it goes also for different nations, basically. So it's important with collaboration both between, on a national level, that we learn from each other on a national level about what different approaches can be taken to address this issue. But obviously also then within our countries, it's important for the academic institutions to be able to share experiences, share good and bad examples with each other in an environment where, in a trusted environment, as it were, with their equals, with their peers, with people who are in the same situation that they are, not just with the government or with somebody who's going to tell them you should do this, that and the other, but to be able to discuss with people who are in the same situation, dealing with similar issues, perhaps from a different perspective, and learn from each other. So I think the more, at least in Sweden, the more we can do that, and the more the academic institutions put in place a systematic approach to how they work with these issues, the less risk there is of being regulation and legislation. Because if it's not being addressed systematically, that's what's going to happen. Yeah, that's what I think anyway. And the learning from each other, learning from the best practices, learning also from, if we can, it's not easy to share when things go wrong, but also learning from mistakes and to help each other on this topic, which is actually it's very complex and it's not easy. So we need all the help we can get. In addition to that, I think I've mentioned a support structure a number of times now, and I think it's important also that on a national level there is something that can help academic institutions to collaborate. I know a lot of them do already in various shapes and forms, but for example in Sweden we're looking at providing some sort of support function where we will provide arenas for them to collaborate. We will provide the repository for various bits of information that is needed in this work. Perhaps some sort of function so that they can chat to each other, not necessarily having to meet all the time. All sorts of small and easy and perhaps more complex ways for academic institutions and other actors in the ecosystem to be able to collaborate, because I think it is really important that we learn from each other, we can help each other, and I think it's probably also to everyone's benefit if we try to have the same sort of approach, so that not one institution does things one way and allows for types of collaborations that others completely find abhorrent, possibly. Some sort of common approach, I think, would benefit everyone, although there will be differences because of the different capabilities and different approaches within the academic institutions. But there's some sort of a common approach, I think, is a good start. So learning from each other and sharing experiences and good practices, I think, will benefit everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Fiona, what have you got to say about how we might learn from each other in the sector and from other organisations? So what, not just universities, but what is the role of RAND, for example, of working with the sector in this space?
Yeah, so the organization I work for, RAND, we, as I was mentioning at the start, we produce research for the government, but most of it tends to be public and published. The type of research we do could help you in better understanding the risks and understanding the ecosystem. So going back to what we were saying, one of the key principles will be for you to know your partner, understand who you're collaborating with. That requires a huge amount of knowledge, and we don't expect everyone to be a specialist in the Chinese military. So what organization like us and what government can provide as well is more understanding of your partner's ecosystem. A partner that's affiliated with the Chinese military might not have directly on their bio saying that they're affiliated with the Chinese military. It's an ecosystem. There's subsidiaries of subsidiaries of subsidiaries. What organization like us can do is try to understand that ecosystem and how people are connected in the ecosystem and help you see those links. In terms of sharing practices between organization, I think this is where the idea of the clearinghouse that you mentioned is really interesting, because a lot of tools, commercial tools are becoming available for you to do that due diligence. But the ecosystem of different countries, of Russia, of Iran, of China, of other countries, are massive. No one commercial provider is capable of mapping the entire ecosystem of every individual. And even if they did, the actors adapt. They change the names of their research institutes. Some researchers also change their names after they've been under investigation in some countries. And so this is where, instead of mapping an entire ecosystem, you may go to your next door university and say, I've looked at this case, do you have any information on XYZ partner that you could share? I can't find it on a commercial provider's webpage. This is where this information sharing would reduce the cost to universities, and where there's a lot to be gained in sharing this information.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of sharing information, a number of countries now have lists, whether they're watch lists or sanctions lists, blacklists, lists of individuals or organisations that their universities are advised not to work with. So the latest country to come up with one of these lists is Canada. I wondered, Valerie, if you've got a view on how useful those lists are or aren't when you're doing the practical business of due diligence, of trying to make decisions on individual projects and collaborations.
Okay, these lists are very useful for me for due diligence, because yes, we are working with sanction lists, our national sanction list, sanction list of EU. NATO and so on. And for example, we have to consider the sanction list of US, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and so on, because if we are working together in some research project, and for example, Czech Republic had no these people on sanction list, but for example, in the US there is a potential risk of secondary sanctions from the US. They can quit the cooperation with us because we have a cooperation with somebody on their sanctions list. So I have to know the sanctions list. I have to know where to look, because the sanctions lists are upgraded, I think, 3 times a day. It's very lively, and we have these guidelines. I think I didn't mention that on the 17th faculties I have a coordinator for my subject, and I have to make him to know, him or her, to know where to look at the beginning of the cooperation. The sanctions lists are the most effective. Then we are also looking at, for example, Australian ASPI. This is the very useful tool, but it's not so up to date. The Australian website where is Chinese universities are guidelines for us how to manage with Chinese universities, and for example Canadian lists. There are Chinese and Russian universities with there is no cooperation in Canada if there is public money or something like that. And we are looking at these lists more and more. And it's changing, yes, it's changing, and you have to do due diligence and also on websites and on internet. And yes, as my colleague Fiona said, it's case by case, and it's individual, yes.
Sorry, can I add to this? The lists are really, really useful, but at the end of the day, as you say, they're constantly evolving, and so are the actors' methods. Once they're put on a list, they're obviously trying to find a way to bypass that list. So, for instance, one Chinese actor that was put on the US entity list has then invested money in a fund that would fund research through a third party. And so this is where you need to understand the entire ecosystem, where the money comes from, who's the actor, who are they interacting with. You look at an individual and you try to understand not only which university they're affiliated with, because they could also not be on the list, but their interaction with who they receive money from, who they usually collaborate with, have they received any prize that scientific distinction that shows that they've supported their country in XYZ area? All those are other indicators that are out there. That's where the case by case is interesting, and the lists are not perfect. They're here to advise and guide, but again, this is where your due diligence efforts come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree they're a starting point. But we have to remember that the hostile actors that we're talking about here are not stupid. As soon as they see their name on a list, they are going to think about a way around that. And that's the reason why in the UK so far we've resisted having a kind of list like the Canadian list, but we still use everyone else's, of course. We use the Canadian list, we use ASPI, we use the sanctions lists are great because, a sanction is a controlled thing. It's back to that very clear-cut space or a grey area. So we do use them, but we're also cautious about the risk of creating a checkbox mentality for due diligence. So related to some of the issues that Fiona was talking about, we're trying to create a security mindset across the sector. We're worried that if we have too many checklists or toolkits or whatever else, we might get to a position where an academic or a research manager kind of thinks, yes, I've answered those 5 questions, I've ticked those 5 boxes, I've done the job, that's it, that's my research security done. And then don't think about the wider issues, who else could be involved, where the money's coming from, whether there's a slightly different risk. These risks are constantly evolving. It's not just the list of 5 things that I wrote on the slide. There'll be something else tomorrow. And that's why the question of culture, I think, is really important. This isn't just a process thing and a case of going through the motions. Anne-Marie, where do you think you are in Sweden with developing that culture?
Let's say we're only starting, quite frankly, but I totally agree with you. It is a cultural thing. What we would like to see happen is that doing the due diligence on your international collaborations, both when they're initiated and throughout the life of the collaboration, should just become part of your everyday work, just like everything else that you need to do as a researcher. And at the moment, it is more work. I wish I didn't have to say that, but it is different. You need to do more checks than you did before. But the thinking is that if we try and make it as easy as possible, not because you need to just check the boxes, because I agree with that as well. Just checking a box doesn't make it right. But working with the culture, and I think it's very much a leadership issue. So it will require things from the leadership of not just academic institutions, but also funding agencies. And at the moment we're in Sweden, we're currently funding a few very small pilot projects that are trying to address the issue of cultural change. So basically we're funding small projects in academic institutions where they can work on, experiment with various ways of working with responsible internationalization in ways that they need to do. And sometimes they need to just find out what is it that we need to do in order to work with cultural change. So we're starting. We haven't got very far, quite frankly. I wish I could say different. I can't say it's easygoing either, but we're trying to promote this cultural change again because it's so much more important than any sort of guidelines and especially regulation and legislation. The cultural change is the key to all of this, I would say, and we're just starting out.
Yeah, well, I was going to come and ask where do you think not just your institution but the Czech Republic more broadly is with that culture change?
The culture change, because I am thinking about it, because I have divided it against the staff, the junior academic and senior academic. And the staff is a trainee, okay. I have very, very small advices how to manage the senior academic, but with the junior academic, we are thinking that, for example, in the Charles University, at the PhD students, we will make some subjects about interference, not mandatory, but it's about the security research, the security of their future in university or academic environment. So we would like to change it from the students, from the PhD students, and I think this is the best way. And we are now doing some I don't know how to say, but advertisement about this interference. We are making videos with the very, very famous academic researcher from the Czech Republic in the Czech language, and it would be in the whole academic area in the Czech Republic, because it would be a moderate discussion with this researcher about this topic. And I think if they would be they give them the advices and they will talk about it, that it's a problem, and they, for example, met this problem in their career, it would be the best for the junior researcher to think about it and to think about it that it's necessary in this world. No. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. So starting with the next generation of researchers is going to be really important. And the next generation of research managers as well, I would say. So coming back to my earlier point that there is no talent pipeline for people who do Valerie's job or the job of the trusted research managers that I have in my team. I can't just go out and easily hire someone. The last time that I wanted to hire someone in this space, I had to go out to recruitment 3 times. I had only 1 or 2 applicants each time to the role. And it took me a very long time to find someone that was suitable to the role, because the skills and expertise for this space just don't exist. And again, that's largely because it's new. It's a new way of thinking about this within higher education. So I think actually if we started with training, maybe even our undergraduates, certainly our postgraduates, even if those people don't go on to become academics, it might help us to develop a talent pipeline for the research managers and other professional staffs that are going to support you with this agenda in future.
Yes, and just to add to that, even if you don't become a researcher, you probably will go and work for a company where this might be very well be an issue as well, or or a public body where this will be an issue. So I think addressing the issue very early on in people's education and careers, I think that's a very good idea.
Thank you. So Fiona, I'm going to ask you if you could make a recommendation, whether that's a recommendation to colleagues in this room or to Polish universities or indeed the international community. What would be your key recommendation on how we move forward together with this concept of a safer international collaboration?
I really like the idea of moving away from a compliance culture to, I think you called it a security culture. I think the chief of NSF in the US calls it a research security culture. You mentioned universities tend to first put in place processes and solutions, adapt their policies, change their processes, create risk management framework. That's how to respond. We've just talked about how to prepare, awareness raising, training, upskilling your staff, but what about recovering? Think about it as a whole of society approach to create a resilient university. You've got the preparedness phase, you've got the respond phase, and potentially, if things go wrong, you might have the recovery phase. So also, how can you support your academics who might have had those collaborations and today cannot collaborate anymore, have lost their partners, have lost funding, have been name and shame in the media? This is also the role of universities to be there for those people. And so my recommendation would be to think about it as a cycle, a resilient cycle, from the prepare phase to be able to detect and identify the risks, to the response when you've identified them, to, if needed, the recovery phase.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, the same challenge to you.
Thank you. Well, I think you put it very well, Fiona. I think if I speak then from a government perspective, I think government needs to support academic institutions as well as other actors in the research and innovation ecosystem as best they can, rather than providing regulation, legislation and punishment, to work with providing guidelines and tools that can help these organizations help themselves, as it were. Because I think they are the best people to sort things out. But if we can provide help in the form of guidelines and support structures and provide arenas for collaboration and have a dialogue within the ecosystem around these issues, I think that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Valerie?
My recommendation, you have to have support from above. We had from Ministry of Education, Ministry of Interior, we have, I have very close colleagues from these ministries. And it's great because we have a really group together and we are working on guidelines. You have to have support from the headquarters, for example, from rector, from our university, and she is very supporting in this issue. And you have to, if I am speaking for university, for this institution, you have to explain why it is necessary, why it is useful for the university and for the academic staff. It's a service. It's not another obstacles or something like this. And in my practice, I find out that they found out this very helpful for them, because Charles University wanted to be at a research team, and they needed it because they are making research with UK, US, Canada, Australia, and they already know that it's necessary to deal with this this problem. And as my colleague said, it's not stopping international cooperation, it's supporting. And this is my opinion to explain and to spread around the university.
Thank you. I'm going to take moderator's privilege and have two. So my first recommendation actually is to everybody in this room, and my recommendation is simply that you keep talking about this subject, please, with your colleagues. You will all have lots of colleagues, and indeed your PhD students and others that you work with who haven't been able to be here today. And it's really important, I think, that we get as wide an understanding and acknowledgement of this subject as possible, because it does affect every researcher. And now I've forgotten my second recommendation. I remember. My second recommendation is to remember people and the requirement, the real need to take care of people in this process. It can sound like it's a topic that's about cutting-edge technology areas. It can sound like a topic that's about foreign governments and spying and kind of almost, something that ought to be in a movie. At its heart, this topic is about people, not just because of the culture change that we talked about, but because of the need to protect individuals. So I've been in a situation where I've had to call one of my researchers and say, you need to hire a lawyer because the media have picked up on a story about some research that you were interested in. And this was a few years ago before we started having strong guidance on this, and I don't think the university really gave you a lot of guidance at the time, and you're now potentially personally culpable for some legal issues that are coming up as a result of the media storm about your research. That is a horrible, horrible telephone call to have to make. And this researcher had the media camped on his front lawn, his wife and children in the house, and the media are knocking on his door, asking him questions about why he's collaborated with a foreign state who wants to use his research in military weapons against the UK. Please don't ever find yourself in the position of having to have that conversation. And that's why I urge you to keep people at the centre of this conversation and to keep having the conversation. Panel, do you have any other closing remarks that you want to make? Or have we said it all?
Well, I would just like to sort of finish where I started, I suppose. We talk about responsible internationalization, and that includes, the responsibility also includes to actually take the opportunities for as much international collaboration as you possibly can, but to do it responsibly. So it's actually irresponsible to not do international collaboration. Because we need it, and it advances science, and we need to, it's necessary. So I'll stop there. Thank you,
Fiona.
And to follow up on your point on people, I think when you develop your strategy for research security or responsible internationalization or knowledge security, whatever you want to call it, think about creating diversity and inclusion policies that come with it, because we talk a lot about China. There's a risk of racial profiling, and it's really important that your students and staff feels, in a safe space as well. So it's a reality. They're caught in it, and this is also where the university can put those frameworks hand in hand, security and diversity.
Thank you. Valerie.
And for me, as I said, Czech Republic is your neighbor, and we are open to cooperation with Poland or Polish universities. Also in Czech Republic there are thousands of Polish students, and we are learning from UK, from US, and we would like to spread our practical issue with you. If you are interested, don't be afraid to contact me at the Charles University by email or something like that. And we have to cooperate like Central Europe, and I think it's the highest time. to start with it. Okay.
Thank you. We are a little bit ahead of a time, but could I invite you to join me in thanking the panel members this afternoon? Okay, thank you. We have time for questions if the audience have any questions. It wasn't in the schedule, but if you'd like to ask questions, we do have a little bit of time to answer them. Go ahead.
Just one very brief question. So I represent a research organization in Poland, and we are very interested in this topic. Thank you very much for this debate. Very interesting and relevant. And my question is, we had a discussion with a number of partners here on the relevance of this topic and how to prepare for guided cooperation, international cooperation, trust-guided cooperation. The question is, who is in your countries is delivering training to the researchers and to research managers? As we desperately need also the trainings, we are starting with this topic, and probably we would like to cooperate with you on potentially training for our researchers in Poland. So who would you recommend?
Thank you. Anne-Marie, do you want to talk about training in Sweden?
Well, at the moment, I think there are some private actors that provide training, primarily to businesses at the moment. So that's actually one thing we're looking at, to provide some sort of training package to the academic institutions. And I think some of the universities do their own training, but at the moment training is something that we also need to do more of. I know that the National Science Foundation in the US, they have an online training on I think it's on research security rather than responsible internationalization, which is open, available on the web. So that's one place to start. Otherwise, I think there are probably other countries that are better suited at this point to help with training.
Fiona, did you want to come in?
Canada also has some online training courses on research security, and the UK Cranfield University and the University of Edinburgh have created trainings on export control. Organization like mine, RAND, and our partners, we also provide training for government that could be adapted to universities on how to do due diligence. So this is some of the places.
In Czech Republic?
In Czech Republic, there's no national side, but in the Charles University, it's me. I'm doing the training. I'm preparing e-learning in this topic. I prepared an OSINT trainee. It's a part of due diligence for my coordinators and for the staff at the Charles University, and we have to repeat it, this trainee all around, because the OSINT is a little bit changing. It's just the thinking, the mindset, how to make the due diligence. And we are preparing, as I said, videos with senior researchers to spread what the interference actually is. Because in a short video, 1-2 minutes, to say it in the quick way is the best way. If you can imagine, if you have, I can have 1-2 hour presentation what is interfere, but this is the best way how to spread it all the way. So the e-learning mainly.
In the UK, a lot of training is coming from some of the government bodies that I talked about through the Trusted Research Campaign and through RCAT. But also you mentioned research managers. So the training for research managers has come from ARMA, the Association for Research Managers and Administrators. There's a European equivalent, EARMA. I don't think there's a Polish specific equivalent, but there's a Europe-wide organisation. I will be running, since you ask, 3 webinars between now and Christmas with EARMA about different aspects of this topic. IAMA will be circulating the details, but I'll share them with NAWA to share the details as well, so they're open to anyone across Europe. But again, there are some private organisations providing training, and in a lot of cases it's universities having to kind of come up with it themselves and share case studies and practice between individual universities. Over here.
Thank you for the great discussion. I think it's a follow-up question. Because actually you showed different solutions in different countries. Either it's more on the universities, and universities are in a way autonomous how to deal with the problem, or there are some governments that try to support it. And I just wonder, what's your view, which solution would be, I don't know, more efficient or a better one? Do you think there should be like general guidance provided by the government and some governmental body, or I don't know, the cohort of agencies that distribute funding, or is it better that universities develop their own ways of dealing with the problem, maybe sharing some problems? What's your experience, and what would be also the recommendation for us? I mean, where to search like a long-term solutions?
Anne-Marie, you're in the middle of creating your national guidelines. Do you want to talk about that and also the European guidelines?
Yes. The way that we've approached it, I can't really say that this is the best way or not, because I do believe there is a national context that you need to take into account when you choose your model. What we believe is that national guidelines on a national level that can then help academic institutions adapt them to their own needs, as it were. That's the approach that we've taken, and this is in discussion with the with academia in Sweden, because they are very eager to make sure that they take the responsibility of this topic themselves, because we don't want to take a top-down approach with legislation and regulation. So that's where we provide the national guidelines, and in providing a support system to help them do it themselves, but to provide some sort of guidance rather than rules and regulations. So that's what we think will work, but obviously we haven't implemented yet, so I can't say, but that's what we think would work the best for us. We have similar approaches in a number of other countries, but it does depend a little bit on the national context as well. But I think if you look at the academic freedom aspect of things, I think a lot of the responsibility will have to be within the universities. I think otherwise you might meet a lot of resistance, possibly. But again, in a dialogue between, because it's not just, it's just not the responsibility as such with academic institutions, the topic, because it affects everyone. It affects national security, it affects the economic security on a national level, and possibly also on a European level. So you need to take all of these different levels into account, and they need to actually work together one way or another. So I don't know whether that helped you at all, but that's kind of the approach that we're taking. And I think the close dialogue between all of the different levels is also very important. We have the economic security package from the European Union, which can provide some sort of guidance as well. But again, I think that's a good thing, that the recommendation is that these recommendations from the European Union are implemented, as it were, in a national context, because national context does matter. So I hope that was somewhat helpful. Yeah. I'm happy to get back to you in about 2 years' time, maybe, with some more information.
I think it's also just worth pointing out, from a sheer point of view of efficiency, if nothing else, there is so much that we can learn from each other in this space, and I guess that's why we're all in this room today. But I've had this conversation around Europe and indeed around other parts of the world, and we're all grappling with the same challenges. So let's not all individually sit in our little office and try and work out the solution. You know, we can come to a much more efficient and effective solution if we do it together. I mean, research at its heart is a collaborative endeavour. So all of the elements of research management and support and security, for me, should also be a collaborative endeavour. Yes. Sorry, I need an extra microphone to be roving.
Just one information for my colleagues that we have in frame of this project creating and preparing the internationalization strategy. We have also one of the operational goal is to secure the issue of research security somehow for the Polish Academia. So for the next year we have planned, I think, 3 trainings for higher education institutions representatives. I have no idea how we will manage it and how we will find people to do the trainings, but at least we have some financing for this training. So probably we will manage to do it in a way next year.
Hello, my name is Ignacy Rogoń. I'm with Gdańsk University of Technology. My question is if there are any tools that could allow researchers to do some kind of research before entering potentially hazardous corporations, and if so, what are they? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We talked about commercial solutions, but there's a lot of free ways of doing it yourself and for a researcher to do it itself. So you can basically look at affiliation of whoever you're going to collaborate with, their affiliation on their research paper. You look at their publication history of who they've collaborated with in the past. You can go in the acknowledgement section of a research paper and see where they get their funding from. Sometimes if funding is not disclosed, that's also an indication there's a lack of transparency from your funder, from your research partner, which could raise some issues. I would also encourage, very easy, you don't need to speak the language of the other country. There's Google Translate for it now. Search on Baidu, search on whatever other a search engine from the country you're looking at, and look at their profile in their own native language. Go on their website. How much information is there on them? How much there isn't as well? Those questions of transparency are really important and give you indications. So that's the first step. A researcher knows their technology better than we do. They know the application, but they also know who else is best in the field. So one great recommendation I heard from a German university once was when they do the due diligence, they sit down with the researchers and they ask them plainly, is this the best university or the best partner you could be collaborating with? Is there someone else in the field that you could be working with that's better? Or what is there for you to gain from this partnership? So that's a good question to ask. One last recommendation is when you look at a CV, think about if this person has a CV that's a bit too talented, perhaps, too good to be true. Also, is this person under-trained, under-equipped to do the research that you're asking? And have a conversation with them first to check. That's in a very extreme case and when someone is intending to get that technology, but have a conversation also with the partner to try to understand why they want to collaborate with you.
Thank you, Fiona. And I will also say that one of those 3 webinars that I'm going to be running is specifically on resources and tools and different kind of commercial and open source tools that are out there that can help you with that. From being early, we now are out of time, but thank you very much for your questions. Thank you once again to the panel.